The first thing visitors to the Whitmore farm noticed was that despite the well sitting prominently in their front yard, the family hauled water from the stream half a mile away. When asked why, they would fall silent, their eyes darting nervously to the stone circle that never ran dry, even in the worst drought that Salem had ever known. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. Salem, Massachusetts, 1909. The scars of the infamous witch trials had faded from the landscape, but not from the collective memory of the town. Though Salem had grown and modernized like much of New England, pockets of rural isolation remained in the surrounding countryside, where families like the Whitmores lived much as their ancestors had a century before. The Whitmore farmhouse stood at the edge of what locals called the Forgotten Woods, a dense stretch of forest that had somehow escaped the logger's axe. Edward Whitmore had inherited the property from his father, who had received it from his father before him, stretching back to the early days of the colony. The family kept to themselves, attending church in town on Sundays, but otherwise avoiding social gatherings. They were known for their solemn demeanor. Edward, his wife Margaret, their daughters Martha and Ruth, and young son Thomas, always dressed in austere clothing regardless of occasion, their expressions perpetually grave. But it was the well that truly set the Whitmores apart from their neighbors, built of fieldstone in a perfect circle. The well sat 20 yards from the front porch, its wooden cover weathered by decades of New England seasons. Unlike most wells in the region, it had no winch or bucket system attached. Instead, a simple wooden lid lay across its top, removable but heavy enough that young Thomas could not lift it on his own. Jonathan Bennett, the newly appointed schoolmaster who had arrived from Boston that autumn, first heard about the well during his second week in Salem. "The Whitmore boy is bright," Constable Parker told him over dinner at the boarding house. "Takes after his mother, but odd, like the rest of them. Keeps to himself, never plays with the other children." "Shy, perhaps," Bennett suggested, cutting into his mutton. "More than shy," the constable replied, leaning forward. "The whole family's queer, if you ask me. And that well of theirs, strangest thing I've seen in 30 years of law enforcement." Bennett raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's strange about a well?" "They don't use it," Parker said, lowering his voice, though no one else was nearby. "Never have, far as anyone can tell. Edward's grandfather dug it when he first settled the property, but no Whitmore has drunk from it since. They fetch their water from Billington Creek instead, half a mile's walk in each direction." "Perhaps the well water is contaminated," Bennett offered reasonably. "Brackish or sulfuric," Parker shook his head. "Clean as crystal. I've seen it myself when I delivered a tax notice last spring. Edward had the cover off, staring down into it like he was in a trance. When he noticed me, he slammed that lid back so quick you'd think there was gold at the bottom he didn't want seen." Bennett's curiosity was piqued. As a man of science and education, he found such rural superstitions fascinating, windows into the psychology of isolated communities, and no one knows why they won't use it. "There are stories," Parker said, glancing around before continuing. "When I was a boy, my grandmother told me that the first Whitmore to own that land, Edward's great-grandfather, didn't dig the well at all. He found it already there, the stones arranged in a perfect circle though half buried in soil. All he did was clear away the dirt and remove the slab that covered it." "Curious," Bennett murmured. "The indigenous people who lived here before the colonies, they avoided that spot entirely, called it the Whispering Place, or something similar, according to my grandmother. Said it was a door to somewhere else." Bennett smiled politely, though skeptically. Every rural town had its legends, usually a blend of misunderstood natural phenomena and superstition. Still, he found himself thinking about the Whitmore well as he prepared his lessons that evening. His opportunity to learn more came sooner than expected. The following afternoon, as Bennett was dismissing his students, Reverend Thorne arrived at the schoolhouse with a request. "The Whitmore farm needs a proper assessment," the minister explained. "Edward's mother passed recently, and as executor of her will, I must inventory the property. I'd appreciate a literate companion for the task." Bennett accepted readily, his scholarly curiosity outweighing any reservations. The following Saturday found him accompanying the Reverend along the winding dirt road leading to the Whitmore farm. The family received them with formal politeness, though Bennett noticed how young Thomas's eyes lit with interest at the sight of his teacher outside the classroom. Edward Whitmore, a tall man with a perpetually furrowed brow, instructed his wife and daughters to prepare refreshments while he and Reverend Thorne discussed business matters. Left momentarily alone in the front parlor, Bennett found himself drawn to the window overlooking the infamous well. In the pale October sunlight, it seemed utterly ordinary, a simple stone circle with a wooden cover, no different from countless others throughout New England. Yet something about it held his gaze, an inexplicable feeling that the well was somehow looking back at him. "You're curious about it, aren't you?" Bennett turned to find Martha Whitmore, the elder daughter, standing in the doorway. At 19, she had the solemn bearing of her family, but her eyes held an intelligence that belied her rural upbringing. "I've heard mention of it in town," he admitted. "People seem to find it unusual that your family doesn't use it." A ghost of a smile passed across Martha's face. "People in town find many things about us unusual, Mr. Bennett. Is there a reason for not using the well, I mean?" Martha glanced toward the study where her father and the Reverend were engrossed in conversation, then back to Bennett. "The water is not right for drinking. Contaminated?" he asked, echoing his earlier theory. "No," she replied quietly. "Clear as glass and cold even in August, but it shows things to those who drink it." Bennett's scholarly interest deepened. "Shows things? What do you mean?" Martha hesitated, then spoke in a near whisper. "When I was 12, I drank from it without knowing the family rule against it. That night, I dreamed of my cousin Abigail in Boston, though I'd never met her. In the dream, she fell from a horse and broke her arm. A week later, we received a letter telling us exactly that had happened on the very night I dreamed it." Bennett felt a chill despite the warm room. "A coincidence? Surely." "That's what I thought," Martha replied, "until I drank from it again. Deliberately this time. I saw Mrs. Porter's barn burning 3 days before the lightning struck it. I saw Reverend Thorne's wife falling ill before even she knew she was sick. Her voice had taken on an intensity that transformed her normally placid features. The well water shows what will be, Mr. Bennett. Never wrong, never uncertain. That's why we don't drink from it." Before Bennett could respond, they were interrupted by the return of Edward Whitmore and Reverend Thorne. Martha immediately assumed a more demure posture, her moment of animation gone as quickly as it had appeared. Throughout the afternoon, as Bennett assisted with the inventory, he found his thoughts returning to Martha's story. As a rational man, he dismissed the notion of prophetic well water as superstition. Yet the conviction in Martha's voice had been compelling. She clearly believed what she was saying. When their business was concluded, Reverend Thorne prepared to depart. To Bennett's surprise, Edward Whitmore extended an unexpected invitation. "The harvest approaches, and we find ourselves short-handed this year," he said stiffly. "If you seek additional employment beyond your teaching duties, Mr. Bennett, we could offer room and board in exchange for assistance." Bennett accepted almost immediately, driven by curiosity as much as by the practical advantages of the arrangement. His room at the boarding house was expensive and noisy, and the opportunity to observe the Whitmore family and their mysterious well at close quarters was too intriguing to pass up. As they walked back toward town, Reverend Thorne commented on his swift acceptance. "The Whitmores are good, God-fearing people," he said carefully, "but they keep to the old ways. Most in town find them difficult to understand." "I find them interesting," Bennett replied honestly. "Just remember," the Reverend added with unusual solemnity, "some mysteries are better left unexplored, particularly in Salem." The following Monday, Bennett moved his meager possessions to the small but clean room on the second floor of the Whitmore farmhouse. From his window, he could see the well sitting in the yard below, its wooden cover in place, solid and ordinary in the fading daylight. That night, he dreamed of dark water and whispering voices, though he had not taken so much as a sip from the Whitmore well. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. Bennett's first week at the Whitmore farm passed uneventfully. By day, he assisted Edward with preparations for the harvest, mending fences and repairing tools. In the evenings, after teaching at the schoolhouse, he would return to the farm for a quiet supper with the family, before retiring to his room to prepare the next day's lessons. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. Despite the mundane routine, Bennett found himself increasingly fascinated by the family dynamics. The Whitmores moved through their daily tasks with mechanical precision, speaking little during meals and even less during their evening activities. Edward would read from the Bible, Margaret would mend clothing, Martha would knit, Ruth would practice her needlepoint, and young Thomas would study his school lessons under his elder sister's watchful eye. And always, there was the well. From his window, Bennett observed how the family navigated around it, never approaching unnecessarily, their paths through the yard curving away from the stone circle as if by instinct. Even the farm animals, the chickens, the old mare, the milk cow, seemed to avoid the area immediately surrounding it. On the seventh night, Bennett's dreams of dark water returned, more vivid than before. He found himself standing at the edge of the well, peering down into its depths. Unlike normal wells where darkness would obscure the bottom, he could see all the way down, the water crystal clear, yet somehow darker than ink. From far below, something moved, not a reflection, but a presence looking back at him. He awoke with a gasp, his nightshirt soaked with sweat despite the cool October night. At breakfast, Martha studied his face with unusual directness. "You dreamed of the well," she said. "It wasn't a question." Bennett nearly choked on his porridge. How did you know?" "Everyone does, eventually," she replied quietly, glancing to ensure her parents were occupied with serving Thomas. "Those who stay here long enough, the well, it reaches out." Before she could elaborate, Margaret called Martha to help clear the table, and the moment passed. But that afternoon, as Bennett was splitting firewood in the yard, Martha approached him again, a leather-bound journal clutched to her chest. "If you truly wish to understand, you should read this," she said, offering him the book. "I've kept record of what I've seen, what the well has shown me." Bennett accepted the journal with academic interest. "Your visions from drinking the water?" Martha nodded, her usually solemn expression intensified by something like warning. "Read it in private. Father wouldn't approve." That night, after the household had retired, Bennett lit his lamp and opened Martha's journal. The first entry was dated 6 years earlier, written in the careful penmanship of a young girl. April 18th, 1903. "Today I drank from our well, not knowing Father's rule against it. The water tasted like no water I've ever had before, cold and somehow older, if water can be old. That night I dreamed of Cousin Abigail, whom I've never met, falling from a dapple grey horse and breaking her arm. The dream was so clear I could hear the snap of the bone and her cry of pain." The next entry, dated a week later, recorded the arrival of a letter from Boston, informing the family that Cousin Abigail had indeed broken her arm in a riding accident on the very day Martha had dreamed it. Page after page documented similar incidents, predictions of weather events, visitors, illnesses, all recorded first as dreams and later confirmed in follow-up entries. Bennett's rational mind searched for explanations, coincidence, selective memory, the power of suggestion, but the sheer volume and specificity of the accounts was difficult to dismiss. The most recent entry, dated just 3 days before Bennett's arrival, sent a chill through him. October 8, 1909. The well is more active than usual. I didn't drink from it. I haven't in years, but I can hear it calling at night. Father hears it too, though he won't admit it. Last night I dreamed a stranger came to stay with us, a learned man from the city. He was looking down into the well, and something was looking back. I fear what might happen if he gives in to his curiosity. Some doors are meant to remain closed. Bennett closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. The rational part of his mind insisted there must be a scientific explanation. Perhaps minerals in the water that caused hallucinations or vivid dreams. Yet he couldn't ignore the accuracy of Martha's recorded predictions, nor the disturbing fact that she had dreamed of his arrival before Reverend Thorne had even proposed the arrangement. The next morning, Bennett found himself studying the well with new interest as he crossed the yard to the barn. In daylight, it seemed so ordinary, just stones stacked in a circle, the wooden cover weathered but solid. What secrets could such a simple structure possibly hold? His opportunity to investigate came sooner than expected. That afternoon, Edward announced that he and Margaret would be traveling to town for supplies, taking the younger children with them. Martha will remain to prepare supper, he informed Bennett. We shall return before dark. As the wagon disappeared down the lane, Bennett approached Martha, who was hanging laundry on the line. Your journal is quite remarkable, he said carefully. The accuracy of your predictions defies rational explanation. Martha continued pinning a sheet to the line, her face impassive. There's nothing rational about the well, Mr. Bennett. That's what makes it dangerous. Have others experienced these visions? Your family members? She paused, glancing toward the house, as if concerned about being overheard despite their solitude. My father drank from it once, before I was born. He never speaks of what he saw, but sometimes I hear him crying out in his sleep. Thomas is forbidden from even approaching it. And your mother? Your sister? Mother refuses to acknowledge its power. Ruth is sensitive to it even without drinking. She can sense when it's especially active. Martha secured the last of the laundry and turned to face him directly. You want to investigate it scientifically, don't you, Mr. Bennett? He nodded, somewhat surprised by her perceptiveness. I believe there must be a natural explanation. Perhaps something in the mineral composition of the water affects the mind, creating vivid dreams that coincidentally align with future events. Martha's expression softened with something like pity. Did the people who lived on this land before us, the indigenous tribes, they knew better. They sealed the well with a stone slab and performed rituals around it to keep what's inside from getting out. My great-grandfather removed the slab, thinking he'd discovered a ready-made well. Our family has lived with the consequences ever since. What exactly do you believe is inside it? Bennett asked, his academic skepticism warring with the undeniable earnestness of Martha's belief. A door, she said simply. Not to another place, exactly. More like to all possible futures. When you drink the water, you open yourself to visions of what will be. But the door works both ways. Whatever lives on the other side, it can see us too. A chill ran down Bennett's spine despite the afternoon sunlight. You believe something sentient dwells within the well? I know it, Martha replied. I've heard it whispering. Especially on still nights when the moon is full. She hesitated, then added, like tonight will be. That evening, after the family had returned and the household settled into their usual quiet routine, Bennett found himself unable to focus on his lesson plans. Martha's words kept replaying in his mind, along with the vivid dreams he'd experienced since arriving. The rational explanation that local legends had influenced his subconscious seemed increasingly inadequate. As the Whitmores retired for the night, Bennett noticed Edward lingering in the parlor, staring out the window toward the well with unusual intensity. "Is everything all right, Mr. Whitmore?" Bennett inquired. Edward started, as if caught in a private moment. "It's active tonight," he said, his typical stoicism cracking slightly. "You'd do well to keep your window shuttered, Mr. Bennett. Some sights aren't meant for civilized eyes." With that cryptic warning, Edward retreated to the master bedroom, leaving Bennett alone with his curiosity and growing unease. Bennett tried to sleep, but found himself restless. The full moon cast silver light through his window, despite the partially closed shutters, and in the silence of the rural night, he became aware of a sound, faint but persistent, a soft lapping of water, like gentle waves against a shore, though the nearest body of water large enough to produce such sounds was miles away. Against all better judgment, Bennett rose from his bed and approached the window. The well was clearly visible in the moonlight, its wooden cover still in place. Yet the sound of moving water continued, now accompanied by something else, a whisper so faint he couldn't make out words, but undeniably there. Scientific curiosity overcame caution. Bennett dressed quickly and quietly made his way downstairs, careful to avoid the creaking third step. The kitchen door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, a farmer's practical consideration rather than any design for stealth. The night air was crisp with approaching winter, his breath visible in small clouds as he crossed the yard toward the well. The whispering grew louder with each step, though still indistinct. By the time he reached the stone circle, it had resolved into a rhythmic chant in a language he didn't recognize, older than Latin, with harsh consonants and flowing vowels that seemed to bypass his ears and vibrate directly in his mind. The wooden cover trembled slightly, as if something beneath it was generating waves in the water below. Bennett hesitated only briefly before grasping the edge of the lid and slowly, carefully sliding it aside. Moonlight illuminated the interior of the well, reflecting off water that was impossibly clear, yet somehow darker than the night sky. Bennett could see straight to the bottom, far deeper than any normal well should be. The stone sides descended at least 100 feet, though the Whitmore property shouldn't have allowed for such depth. And in that impossible depth, something moved. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. At first, Bennett thought it was merely a reflection of the stars, pinpricks of light swirling in the depths. Then the lights began to arrange themselves, forming patterns that were almost recognizable, like symbols in a language he had seen but couldn't quite read, a mesmerizing dance of luminescence that drew his gaze deeper and deeper. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. You shouldn't have removed the cover. The voice startled Bennett so badly he nearly fell forward into the well. He whirled around to find Martha standing a few yards away, her white nightgown ghostly in the moonlight, her face unnaturally pale. "I was just," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I know what you were doing. Everyone does eventually." She approached slowly, careful to keep her distance from the open well. The curiosity becomes too much to bear. Bennett stepped back from the edge, suddenly aware of how precariously he had been leaning over it. "There's something down there, Martha. Something moving." "Yes," she agreed simply. "There always has been." A gust of cold wind swept across the yard, carrying the whispering sounds to a crescendo before dying away again. Martha shivered, though whether from the chill or something else, Bennett couldn't tell. "And my father will be furious if he discovers the well uncovered," she said. "We should replace the lid." Bennett hesitated, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing sense of unease. What exactly is down there? What are those lights? Martha's expression was difficult to read in the moonlight, but her voice carried a weight of generational knowledge. The old tribes called them the Watchers at the Threshold. beings that exist between what is and what might be. She gestured toward the well. Do they show us possible futures through the water, but they ask for something in return. What could such entities possibly want? Bennett asked, his rational mind struggling with concepts beyond its understanding. Connection, Martha said. Influence. A way into our world. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Oh, they're patient. They've been trying for generations. Before Bennett could respond, the water far below began to churn more violently. The light swirled faster, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape that stretched upward, reaching toward the surface. With it came a sound like dozens of voices whispering in unison, no longer indistinct, but forming clear words. Jonathan, we've been waiting for you. Bennett stumbled backward, nearly falling in his haste to put distance between himself and the well. Martha showed no surprise at the phenomenon, only a grim resignation. They know your name, she said quietly. They know everyone who comes near. That's how they find the cracks in your mind to slip through. With surprising strength, she pushed the heavy wooden cover back over the well, muffling but not completely silencing the whispering voices. Come inside, Mr. Bennett. It's not safe to remain here. Back in the kitchen, Martha lit a lamp and put a kettle on the stove. Neither spoke until she had placed a steaming cup of tea in front of him, the familiar, mundane ritual somehow grounding after what they had witnessed. How long has your family known about them? Bennett asked finally. Martha sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own cup. Since my great-grandfather removed the stone slab, the indigenous people had warnings carved into it, but he couldn't read their language. He thought he'd found a convenient water source. She took a sip of tea. By the time he realized what he'd uncovered, it was too late. The entities had already established a connection to our family. Through the water, Bennett murmured, remembering her journal entries. She nodded. At first, they seemed benevolent. The water granted visions, useful foreknowledge of weather, harvests, illnesses. My ancestors thought it a blessing, her expression darkened, until they realized the visions were changing them. Those who drank regularly began to hear the whispers, even when far from the well, began to see the watchers in their peripheral vision, shadows moving just out of sight. What happened to them? Bennett asked, dreading the answer. They became vessels, not themselves anymore, but not fully the watchers either. Something in between. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. My great-grandmother was the first. She drank from the well daily for months. One night, she walked out into the yard during a storm, stared into the well for hours without blinking, even as rain lashed at her. When my great-grandfather tried to bring her inside, she spoke in a voice that wasn't hers, in a language no one recognized. Bennett felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What became of her? She left, walked into the forgotten woods and never returned. Martha's eyes glistened in the lamplight. Since then, we've kept the well covered, never drunk from its water, warned each generation of the danger, but they're persistent. They find ways to reach us through dreams, through reflections, through moments of weakness. Like tonight, Bennett said, understanding dawning. The full moon. You said the well becomes more active then. Yes. The boundary between their realm and ours thins during certain celestial alignments. Martha glanced toward the window, though the well wasn't visible from the kitchen. It's why Father was so anxious tonight. The autumn equinox approaches, and the watchers grow more desperate in their attempts to cross over. They sat in silence for a moment, Bennett trying to reconcile what he had seen with his understanding of the natural world. Finally, a thought occurred to him. Your journal, he said slowly. Or you recorded predictions that came true with remarkable accuracy. If the visions show possible futures, how can they be so precise? A shadow crossed Martha's face. That's what makes them so dangerous. The Watchers don't just show futures, they influence them. Each vision is a thread they weave into the fabric of what will be. She leaned forward, her voice urgent. When we see their visions and believe them, we help make them real. Our expectations, our fears, our preparations, all create pathways for those possibilities to manifest. Bennett's academic mind raced with the implications. A self-fulfilling prophecy, magnified by some force we don't understand. Exactly. Martha seemed relieved by his comprehension. That's why we try to ignore the dreams they send, why we never discuss what we've seen in the visions. Acknowledgement gives them power. Bennett thought of his own dreams since arriving at the farm, the dark water, the sense of being watched. I haven't drunk from the well, yet I've dreamed of it. You've been in proximity to it for days, Martha explained. The Watchers can reach sensitive minds even without direct contact. Some people are more receptive than others. She studied his face. You're one of them, Mr. Bennett. That's why they called your name tonight. They've already established a connection. The implications chilled him. How do I break this connection? Before Martha could answer, a floorboard creaked overhead. Both froze, listening as heavy footsteps crossed the second-floor hallway. Edward Whitmore, awake and moving about. Father must have sensed the well was uncovered, Martha whispered urgently. You should return to your room. We'll speak more tomorrow. Bennett nodded, rising quietly. At the kitchen door, he turned back. One last question. Why doesn't your family leave? Move away from the well. Martha's smile was sad, resigned. We've tried 3 times in my lifetime alone. Each attempt ended with intervention, illness, accidents, financial ruin. She shook her head. The Watchers won't release what they consider theirs. We're bound to this place, to our role as guardians of the threshold. The following morning, Edward Whitmore was uncharacteristically silent at breakfast, though his eyes constantly darted toward Bennett with undisguised suspicion. The tension in the household was palpable, the usual mechanical routine disturbed by an underlying current of anxiety. As Bennett prepared to leave for the schoolhouse, Edward finally addressed him directly. I know you were at the well last night, he said, his voice low but steady. Martha told me she found you there. Bennett saw no point in denial. Yes, I was curious about the stories I'd heard. Edward's expression hardened. Curiosity is a luxury we cannot afford, Mr. Bennett, not with what lies beneath our land. He glanced toward the window, toward the well sitting innocuously in the morning sunlight. The cover must remain in place, always. I understand, Bennett replied. I apologize for my indiscretion. Edward studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his sincerity. The Watchers have noticed you now. They'll try to reach you again, especially as the equinox approaches. His stern demeanor softened slightly, revealing something like concern. Be vigilant. Question what you see, what you hear. Not all thoughts in your mind will be your own. Throughout the day, teaching at the schoolhouse, Bennett found himself distracted. The rational framework through which he had always viewed the world seemed suddenly inadequate, unable to accommodate what he had witnessed. Yet he could not dismiss it as hallucination or hysteria. Not with the confirmation from multiple members of the Whitmore family, not with the precision of Martha's documented predictions. That evening, as he returned to the farm, Bennett noticed something different about the well. The wooden cover had been removed and propped against the stone circle. Edward stood beside it, his tall frame rigid with tension, staring down into the depths. Bennett approached cautiously. Mr. Whitmore, is everything all right? Edward didn't look up. They're getting stronger. I can feel them pushing against the boundary. Bennett peered over the edge. In daylight, the well appeared normal, just a deep shaft with clear water at the bottom. No sign of the swirling lights or impossible depth he had witnessed the night before. "Don't see anything unusual," he said. "You will," Edward replied grimly. "When the sun sets, the equinox is tomorrow, and they're preparing." He finally turned to Bennett, his usually stern face haggard with fatigue. "We've kept them contained for generations, but each year it grows more difficult. They learn, adapt, find new weaknesses to exploit." "What happens if they cross over?" Bennett asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Edward's gaze returned to the well. "I don't know. None of us do. The indigenous people who sealed the well originally left warnings about the unraveling of what is, if the Watchers ever fully entered our world." He shook his head. "I only know we cannot allow it to happen." As dusk approached, the entire Whitmore family gathered around the well. Even young Thomas, usually kept far from it, stood solemnly between his sisters. Margaret brought out a small wooden box containing various items: a pouch of salt, bundles of dried herbs, small stones carved with unfamiliar symbols. "The equinox ritual," Martha explained quietly to Bennett, who watched from a respectful distance. "We reinforce the boundary each solstice and equinox. It's necessary." The ritual itself was unlike anything Bennett had ever witnessed. Not quite Christian, not quite pagan, but a strange hybrid that had clearly evolved over generations to address a specific need. The Whitmores moved around the well in patterns that seemed random at first, but gradually revealed an intricate design, like planets orbiting an invisible sun. As the last light faded from the sky, Edward sprinkled water from Billington Creek, never from the well itself, in a circle around the stone structure, while Margaret laid the carved stones at precise intervals along the perimeter. Martha and Ruth scattered salt and herbs in alternating handfuls, reciting what sounded like Latin mixed with something much older. Bennett, standing just outside their circle, felt a change in the air, a heaviness, as if the atmosphere itself were condensing around the well. From within the stone shaft came the now familiar sound of water moving, though there was no wind to disturb it. Then, as the ritual reached its climax, something went wrong. Young Thomas, whose role was simply to hold a lantern to illuminate the proceedings, stumbled. The light swung wildly, then went out as the lantern fell from his hands. In the sudden darkness, confusion erupted. "Relight it quickly!" Edward's voice cut through the chaos. "We cannot lose the pattern now!" Bennett rushed forward with his own matchbox, kneeling beside the fallen lantern. As he struck a match, its small flame illuminated Thomas's face inches from his own. The boy's eyes were wide, unfocused, his expression slack. "Mr. Bennett," he whispered, but the voice wasn't that of a child. It held the same multiple-toned quality Bennett had heard from the well. "Help us cross. We can show you everything, past, present, future. All knowledge could be yours." Bennett recoiled, the match burning down to his fingers before he dropped it. In that moment of darkness, he felt something fundamental shift. Not in the physical world, but in the boundary the Whitmores had worked so hard to maintain. When he finally managed to relight the lantern, the scene before him had changed. The water in the well now glowed with an inner light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The swirling patterns Bennett had glimpsed the night before were fully visible, rising higher in the shaft, nearly reaching the surface. Edward's face was ashen as he pulled Thomas away from the well's edge. "It's happening. They're breaking through." Martha turned to Bennett, her usual composure shattered by genuine fear. "The ritual is incomplete. The boundary is failing." In that moment, staring into the luminescent water that seemed to reach up toward them with purpose, Bennett made a decision. Science might not have answers for what he was witnessing, but that didn't mean he was powerless. "What can I do?" he asked. "How can I help?" The night that followed would forever alter Jonathan Bennett's understanding of reality. Working alongside the Whitmores, he helped rebuild the failing boundary, not through science or rational methods, but through the same hybrid ritual that generations of the family had performed. His academic mind recorded every detail, even as his worldview expanded to accommodate what should have been impossible. By dawn, the well had been sealed again, not just with its wooden cover, but with a new stone slab carved with symbols that Martha had seen in a vision years earlier and faithfully reproduced. The watchers had been pushed back, their voices reduced to distant whispers that only Thomas, still recovering from his brief possession, could hear. As the first light of the equinox sun touched the farmyard, Edward Whitmore approached Bennett, his perpetual sternness tempered with something like respect. "You understand now," he said. "It wasn't a question," Bennett nodded. "Not everything. Perhaps not even most of it, but enough to know the importance of what your family does. Few outsiders have witnessed what you have and maintained their sanity," Edward continued. "Fewer still have chosen to help rather than flee." "What happens now?" Bennett asked, exhaustion making his voice rough. Edward looked toward the sealed well, then back to Bennett. "That depends on you. You're connected to them now. The Watchers know you, have touched your mind. You can leave, try to forget what you've seen, though they may still reach you in dreams. Or, Bennett prompted when Edward hesitated. Or you can stay. Help us maintain the boundary. The burden is easier when shared." 3 days later, Constable Parker was discussing local gossip at the boarding house when someone mentioned the new schoolmaster. "Bennett, odd fellow," the constable remarked. "Educated but peculiar. Moved out to the Whitmore farm, you know. Heard he's not coming back to town," another patron added, and sent a letter resigning his teaching position, something about pursuing research of a specialized nature. Parker shook his head. "Those Whitmores. Something not right about that family. And that well of theirs. Strangest thing I've seen in 30 years of law enforcement." On the Whitmore farm, Jonathan Bennett added a new entry to his own journal, documenting observations not for scientific publication, but for future guardians of the threshold. Outside, the newly sealed well sat silent in the autumn sunlight, ordinary to any casual observer. But Bennett knew better now. Beneath the stone and wood, beyond the clear water that no one dared drink, the Watchers waited patiently at the threshold between worlds, eternal and unhurried. And sometimes, on still nights when the moon was full, if one listened carefully, one might hear them whispering promises of all possible futures to anyone willing to help them cross. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, follow this channel. The next story might be closer than you imagine.